Two goats stand before the high priest of Israel. They are identical, the same size, the same color, the same value. By law, no one must be able to tell them apart. The priest reaches into a vessel and draws two lots of gold. One lot reads, "For the Lord." The other lot carries a name, not a place, not a symbol, a name, and it is not God's. The Bible never explains who Azazel is. It simply assumes you know. But one book does explain, a book that was quoted by the apostles, then banned, buried, and forgotten for over 1,000 years. And its answer changes everything about the most famous word that ritual ever gave us. By the end of this story, you will know who was waiting in that desert, and you will never say the word scapegoat the same way again. It is the 10th day of the 7th month. Jerusalem holds its breath. This is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the single most dangerous day in the calendar of ancient Israel. On this day, and only this day, one man will walk into the Holy of Holies, the small dark room at the heart of the temple where the presence of God is said to dwell. No window, no lamp, a room of pure darkness behind a veil. Tradition says men have died in that room. The high priest enters it the way a man enters a fire. But before he can enter, there are the goats. Watch them. Two animals standing in the morning light on the Temple Mount before a crowd of thousands. The priest shakes the golden lots in the vessel. The crowd is silent. He draws. One goat is now for the Lord. It will die on the altar within the hour, its blood carried into the darkness behind the veil, sprinkled on the golden lid of the ark itself. The other goat will not be sacrificed. It will not touch the altar. Its blood will never be spilled in the temple, because this goat belongs to someone else. The book of Leviticus, chapter 16, says it plainly. One lot for the Lord, one lot for Azazel. Two names, two destinations. A perfect, deliberate symmetry, written into the holiest ritual of the entire Torah. Stop and feel the weight of that. The same chapter that describes the presence of God in the Holy of Holies also names a second party in the wilderness. And the text never pauses to tell us who that party is. The crowd watches the second goat, the living one. A strip of scarlet wool is tied to its horns, wool dyed red, the color of sin, the color of blood. The high priest approaches. He raises both hands. He presses them down hard onto the animal's head, and he begins to speak. He confesses, out loud, every sin of the nation, the rebellions, the betrayals, the blood spilled in secret. The text says he places them, physically transfers them, onto the head of the goat. 12 months of an entire people's darkness pressed by two human hands into one animal that does not understand what it now carries. Then a man steps forward. He has been chosen in advance, prepared. His entire purpose is one task: take the goat out of the temple, out of the city, through the eastern gate, while thousands watch from the walls, into the wilderness of Judea, a landscape of bone-dry ravines and burning rock, a place the Hebrew text calls a land cut off, severed, a land that is not part of the world of the living. The Torah says the goat is released there to carry the sins into a solitary land. That is where the Bible stops. But the priests of the Second Temple did not stop there. The Mishnah, the ancient record of how the ritual was actually performed, preserves what really happened in the desert. Booths were built along the route, manned with water and food for the escort. Dignitaries of Jerusalem walked the first stretch with him. Then they turned back. The man and the goat went on alone. 12 miles into the wasteland, they reached a cliff. The tradition names it Tzok. The man divided the scarlet wool. He tied half to the rock, half between the goat's horns. And then, says the Mishnah, he pushed the goat backward off the edge. It did not reach the bottom whole. The text says it was broken apart on the rocks before it was halfway down. This is the ritual behind the gentlest word in the English language. Scapegoat. A word you have said 100 times, in offices, in arguments, on the news. It comes from here, from an animal carrying the sins of a nation, driven into a dead land and destroyed against the stones. But here is the question the Bible leaves hanging in the desert air and never answers. The first goat was for the Lord. The second was for Azazel. The ritual is symmetrical, 2 lots, 2 recipients. If one goat went to God, who received the other one? For centuries, readers have tried to soften the question. Maybe Azazel is just the name of the cliff. Maybe it is an old word meaning complete removal. The Hebrew is genuinely uncertain, and honest scholars still debate it.
The Bible itself refuses to say. But the oldest answer we have, the answer the ancient world itself gave, says something far stranger. There is a book older than the New Testament that was treasured by the communities who hid the Dead Sea Scrolls. Fragments of it lay in the caves of Qumran for 2,000 years. The Letter of Jude, inside the New Testament itself, quotes it by name and calls its words prophecy. And then the book vanished from the Western world, surviving in full in only one place on earth, Ethiopia, where it is still scripture to this day. The Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch knows exactly who Azazel is. In its pages, before the flood, 200 angels called the Watchers descend to the earth. They take human wives, they father monstrous children. But one of them does something the text treats as worse than all of it. His name is Azazel, and Azazel begins to teach. Enoch wrote that Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates. He showed humanity the metals hidden in the earth and how to work them. War itself, the text presents it as a curriculum handed down by one angel. And he taught more. Bracelets, ornaments, the painting of eyes, the beautifying of eyelids, every art of seduction and every coloring tincture, weapons and vanity, the 2 oldest hungers. One teacher. And then comes the verdict of the book in a single line. The whole earth was corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. Read that again. Not partly corrupted, not influenced. The whole earth. One being blamed for the ruin of the world before the flood. Heaven responds. And what heaven does to Azazel is not what it does to anyone else in the story. God summons the archangel Raphael and gives an order that reads like a burial rite for someone who cannot die. The text says, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, split open the desert, and the desert is named Dudael, and throw him in. Cover him with rough and jagged rocks. Cover his face, that he may not see light. And on the great day of judgment, he shall be cast into the fire." Not killed. Angels in this literature cannot be killed. Buried. Alive. Under a desert. Blind beneath the stones, waiting in the dark for a judgment that has not yet come. And then the text adds one more sentence. 5 words that detonate everything you have heard so far. To him ascribe all sin. Hold those 5 words next to the ritual. The high priest presses all the sins of Israel onto a living goat. The goat is driven into the wilderness, a land cut off, a solitary land. And somewhere out in the ancient imagination of that wilderness, a being lies chained beneath the rocks, the one to whom all sin is ascribed.
Now the ritual is no longer strange. It is precise. The sins are not being thrown away, they are being returned, carried back through the desert and delivered to their source, to the buried teacher who, in this telling, started it all. The goat is not an offering to a demon. It is a shipment, addressed, sealed with scarlet, sent to a prisoner. If this sounds like a modern theory stitched together from fragments, it is not. The connection is ancient, and it is Jewish. The Talmud itself, in tractate Yoma, records rabbis explaining the goat of Azazel as atonement connected to the affair of the fallen angels, Uzzah and Azazel, the same figures, the same story. The demonic reading is not an invention of the internet age. It sat inside rabbinic discussion nearly 2,000 years ago. Another ancient text, the Apocalypse of Abraham, goes further. There, Azazel appears to the patriarch Abraham himself in the form of an unclean bird, and heaven rebukes the creature with a sentence that should make your skin prickle. The wilderness is your portion. The desert is his. Allotted, assigned, the same desert the goat walks into. And Israel was not alone in knowing this grammar. Across the ancient Near East, archaeologists have recovered rituals from Mesopotamia and from the Hittite Empire in which evil, plague, or curse is transferred onto an animal and driven out into the steppe, sent away, beyond the border of the living world, sometimes explicitly toward the powers thought to dwell there. The ancient world understood expulsion as delivery. Something out there received what was sent. So the picture assembles itself, piece by ancient piece. A named recipient in the Torah, a buried angel in Enoch, a rabbinic memory in the Talmud, a wilderness assigned as a portion, and a goat, every single year walking the route between the temple of God and the prison of the one to whom all sin is ascribed. Then something happened that the texts record with quiet dread. The Talmud preserves a tradition about the scarlet wool, the red strip tied to the goat. It says that when the atonement was accepted, the scarlet turned white before the people's eyes. Red to white, sin to purity, a visible answer from heaven once a year. And then, the tradition says, in the final 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the scarlet stopped turning white. Year after year. The goat went out, the thread stayed red. That is tradition, not history. The Talmud's own memory of its darkest century, and it must be heard as such. But sit with what that memory claims. For 40 years, the answer stopped coming. And then the temple burned, the ritual ended forever, and the last goat had already walked into the desert. No goat has gone to Azazel in nearly 2,000 years. So how did a name like that, a name written into the Torah itself, simply vanish from the way we speak? It dissolved. Slowly. Deliberately, perhaps. Watch it happen. First, the Book of Enoch falls out of the canon. The church fathers debate it, then drop it. The book that answered the question disappears from the West entirely. Without Enoch, Azazel becomes a word with no story attached. Then the rabbis, holding a name the Bible never explains, debate it honestly. Some say a power, some say a place, some say the cliff itself, Azazel, the rugged, the hardest of mountains. The name blurs into geography. And then comes the year 1530. An Englishman named William Tyndale is translating the Hebrew Bible into English, an act so dangerous it will eventually cost him his life. He reaches Leviticus 16. He finds the word Azazel. He cannot resolve it. There is no Book of Enoch on his desk. The West lost it centuries ago. So he looks at the goat that is sent away, and he does what translators do with a word they cannot crack. He invents one. the scapegoat, the goat that goes free. One stroke of a pen in the 16th century and the name dissolves into a noun. The recipient becomes a function. Within a few generations, the word scapegoat belongs to everyone and points at no one. The address on the shipment has been painted over. Today, the word is everywhere. Every boardroom that needs someone to blame, every team that loses, every scandal that needs a single face. We use it weekly, casually, without a flicker of memory. And almost no one knows that inside the word, sealed like the scarlet thread, is the proper name of a being the ancient texts say lies chained under the floor of a desert. So stand there for a moment where the escort stood, 12 miles from the city, the walls of Jerusalem long out of sight, the cliff of Tzok ahead, the heat coming off the rock in waves, and beside you, an animal carrying everything a nation did wrong in the dark. What is this place, really? What did the priests believe was out here? There are 3 honest answers, and the texts will not let us choose between them. Perhaps Azazel was only ever the cliff, a hard name for a hard place, and the ritual is pure symbolism, sin carried to nowhere, destroyed by distance and stone. Many scholars hold this view, and the Hebrew permits it. Perhaps Azazel was the wilderness power, the way the apocalypse of Abraham saw him, the desert's own dark portion, acknowledged once a year and given nothing but what was already his. Or perhaps the oldest readers were right. Perhaps the ritual remembered something. A teacher buried alive before the flood, a debt of corruption that had to be carried back to its source year after year, hand to head to horns to wilderness, so that the prison would stay closed and the account would stay settled. The Bible could have ended the question with a single sentence. It chose not to. 3,000 years of readers have stood at that silence like the escort at the cliff's edge. And maybe the silence is the point. The Torah names him once a year and tells you nothing more, as if some names are meant to be spoken only with both hands pressed down hard and never explained. Ask yourself this. If the ritual was only symbolism, why a name? Why the perfect symmetry of the lots, one for the Lord, one for him, as if 2 parties stood on either side of that desert and both were owed something on the Day of Atonement? Imagine being the man who led the goat. The dignitaries have turned back. The last booth is behind you. It is just you, the animal, the scarlet thread, and 12 miles of land cut off. Would you have looked at the rocks differently? Would you have wondered what was underneath them? Would you have hurried home before dark? So here is the answer this story promised you. Who was waiting in the desert? The Bible says only Azazel. The Book of Enoch says, the angel who taught the world war and vanity buried alive in Dudael, blind beneath the jagged rocks, the one to whom all sin is ascribed. The Talmud's rabbis tied the goat to the fallen angels. The apocalypse of Abraham gave him the wilderness as his portion. And William Tyndale, who had none of those books, accidentally erased the name and hid it inside a word you will hear again this week. The answer is that the question was answered long ago. We just stopped reading the books that answered it. The goat had an address. We forgot it. The word remembered. Azazel was buried for what he taught, but the watchers left children behind, giants, and when God sent the flood to erase them, the oldest tablets on earth say it was not the first time the waters came.